Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Do you remember when we were all about discussion surrounding the future of work in that 2020 workplace? Well, that 2020 workplace is nearly upon us, and while the workplace is shifting the way we might have expected, there are a number of challenges and themes that we in human capital are looking forward to 2030, that's hard to believe, and beyond. Today we'll be diving into results and themes from Deloitte's most recent Human Capital Trends Report. Erica Vellini is a U.S. human capital leader for Deloitte Consulting. In this role, she is responsible for the 4,000 plus practitioners focused on helping organizations solve their most complex and pressing human capital issues. Erica, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I got into this space in, I guess, sort of a weird way. I actually went to Cornell. I was in the Industrial and Labor Relations program. I was intending to go to law school, and when I realized I did not want to be a lawyer, I sort of bumbled my way through the career database and ended up in consulting. And, my first project was actually for the Administration of Children's Services when I was an intern, helping them put a new system in place and doing all the change management and training around it. And I just got hooked. I just realized the power of how to influence people, how to change behaviors, especially in an organization that was very difficult to change, as you can imagine, but was making this huge investment. And it was so clear how the work we were doing was tied to their mission that it just ended up being a career that I wanted to focus on. And from there, I moved from change management. I did a lot of work in recruiting, in particular during the .com era when it was very necessary for a lot of startups. And then I just continued to make my way around the human capital space and have been in that career ever since.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you have a really well-rounded perspective, which I'm super excited to talk about and hear from you today on that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the most recent human capital trends that came from a report that Deloitte recently released. Your research revealed that 73% of executives reported that their C-suite leaders rarely, if ever, come together on work projects or strategic initiatives. Can you talk about this research a little bit and this particular stat? Because I find it a little disconcerting.
Yeah, disconcerting is definitely a good word. I would say that was the most shocking statistic of our report. So this is our Global Human Capital Trends Survey. We've done it for 6 straight years. It's the largest study of human capital issues in the world. We had over 11,000 people respond across 124 countries. One of the things we've been looking at historically is teamwork in organizations. One of the trends we found over the last few years has been the emergence of what we've called networks of teams, that although organizations have maintained their hierarchies to some degree, that when you look at innovation, a lot of that happens across the matrix. And so we wanted to understand whether that was happening at all levels of the organization. And when we did this, I think we expected, frankly, to see similar collaboration at the C-suite. But instead, what we found was, the statistic that you just said, which is that 73% of the respondents said their C-suite leaders rarely, if ever, work together. And by the way, many of those respondents were C-suite leaders. So that's them themselves saying they don't work together. And I think it's actually fascinating, but it's also really disconcerting, to use your word, because when we look at the challenges that organizations are facing today, and the title of the report is The Rise of the Social Enterprise, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more. But when you think about these challenges and the complexity of these challenges, it's hard to imagine that an organization can solve them in a very divide and conquer manner. And it feels like, and we believe that the organizations that are really rising to the challenges in today's society are the ones that are working across the CIO, the CFO, the CHRO in particular, to help make changes in the organization. So it was our number one trend because there is such a sense of urgency for this group of executives to be working together, and yet we found such a lack of collaboration at that level.
I find it, as I said, disconcerting and fascinating, because organizations that are high performing and high growth organizations are those that are flexible, they're agile, and they're collaborative. And if you can't have collaboration happening among your executives, it's hard to have that same level of expectation, or hard to have a collaborative expectation across all areas of the organization.
I agree, but I think a lot of it's rooted in history. When we look back, it's interesting, back in the, call it like 1920s, right, we had the era of sort of the generals, right? General Motors, General Electric, where there was one CEO, and the CEO kind of dictated what was done to the organization. And then it really wasn't until the late 70s, the 80s, that we started to see other C-suite roles emerge. And it became what we call this divide and conquer approach, right? The CFO was responsible for watching the financials, and the CHRO, if that existed, was responsible for watching the workforce, and the CIO was responsible for looking at the technology. And it worked, right? Because it was complicated, but not that complicated. So everyone kind of stayed in their lane and coordinated where necessary. But if you look at what's happening today in the digital world, right, there is so much crossover that's needed that this divide and conquer approach just isn't working. I just think that organizations haven't quite figured out how do they promote that level of collaboration. But if you think about the world you and I live in human capital, take something like the future of work, right? In order for organizations to tackle the future of work, you need the business at the table, reimagining the way business processes are going to work. You need HR, the CHRO at the table, right, figuring out different talent models. But you also absolutely need the CIO and the IT organization at the table, figuring out how automation and digital technology can be leveraged. There's really no way for the future of work to be tackled without that collaboration, which is frankly why, in the context of human capital, we found that the lack of C-suite collaboration was such an urgent and important issue for us to raise in this year's survey.
So the survey that Erica's referencing is called 2018 Global Human Capital Trends. It's focused on the social enterprise. We'll put a link to that survey on the transcript of this episode of the Workology podcast. I want to get back to thinking about our listeners, because they're human resources and recruiting leaders who are trying to drive that human capital change in the organization. What are some ways that they themselves, maybe as executives or their senior executives, can better collaborate together instead of working in these silos?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I think that future of work and what's happening right now with workforce transformation represents the perfect opportunity for HR to take the lead and help to bring together the organization. Because when you think about what is happening right now with all this automation coming in, frankly, we don't find there's any client that we're dealing with that isn't rethinking the way they get work done. But many organizations are thinking about it in a very siloed manner. I'm going to put in technology, I'm going to change this work process, and I'm going to gain efficiency. But what they have to realize is that in order to really affect change, you have to be changing the composition and the capability of the workforce itself, which requires HR not just to have a seat at the table, but for HR to be front and center. I mean, I think now is so much a time for learning professionals, for talent acquisition professionals, to be rethinking how they're going to change the composition and the capabilities of the workforce. And with that change comes a potential change to the structure of the organization, the culture of the organization, the leadership of the organization, the way in which the workforce is measured and rewarded. And so I kind of liken it to a thread that needs to get pulled throughout the organization. And if I was sitting in HR right now in any organization, I would be pulling together the business, and it doesn't have to be every business. Find a leader in one business who needs to make change to the way they're doing work because of competitive pressure. bring someone from IT to the table and help to coordinate how to rethink what the workforce needs to be moving forward. I actually think for HR, that's the most important question for HR to answer. And I also think it's a tremendous opportunity for HR to be taking the lead. And I don't know that we've seen this kind of transformative issue that is so focused on the human capital in a company exist. I really, in the last 20 years, I can't remember this significant of a challenge in front of companies today. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity, but it's going to be up to HR to bring together all of those stakeholders under that banner.
I like the point that you're making here. This is a huge opportunity for human resources to sort of lead the way, organize the troops, facilitate all these conversations and this collaboration across teams and organizations that needs to happen. And I feel like HR is kind of in this weird position. We've always been in this weird position, but oftentimes if you're the CHRO for an organization, you report to the CEO, but you also have a dotted line reporting to the board, which makes things even more complex. It's different than any other executive position in the organization. And so this sort of it just increases the complexity with the results from your recent report.
It does. However, I will say that I am amazed actually at how much board level interest there has been in this particular topic of late. I think boards understand that having the right workforce and the right capabilities is essential to the execution of the business strategy. And I think therefore they are actually very much aligned with the CEO on this particular topic. I agree that hasn't happened very often, but I think now we're seeing support from both the board level and the executive level. So it's giving HR a huge platform. I think the thing for HR is platform, you have this opportunity in front of you. This also is the time when HR has the most data at their fingertips to actually drive the issue. So to me, what I would love to see is an HR organization who proactively takes the data and the insights that they have at their fingertips and help the businesses, help their customers contextualize the issue in front of them. Because I think sometimes the businesses are saying, okay, yeah, I know I may need to use different talent models. Like I'm hearing about the gig workforce, but I don't know that I need to focus on that right now. Or yes, automation is here, but is it really going to be a game changer? And I think HR has the ability to pull data from their internal sources and externally to help contextualize for their business customers how big of an issue this is, how pressing and urgent it is, and to give them ideas on what they could start to do about it. So to me, this is more than HR having a seat at the table. This is HR setting the table, which I think is a totally different opportunity and set of objectives. So as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about it because I really think now is HR's time to really help drive where the organization is going and what they need to execute the strategy moving forward.
HR is setting the table. No longer the seat at the table, we're setting the table. I love that, Erica. At the most basic level, a team's success or failure at collaboration really reflects the philosophy of top executives in the organization. So much of leadership is about modeling behaviors. This is more about how do we're talking about setting the table. What are some ways that HR can help encourage this collaboration and help these leaders maybe learn to model or learn to be leaders in this collaborative way?
Yeah, I do believe actually that HR needs to reset the definition of what a leader looks like in the digital world. I think it starts there. I think sometimes we think, a digital leader means they have to be great at technology or great at innovation. I totally disagree. To me, digital is a mindset shift. And you talked about some of those characteristics earlier. You mentioned agile, you mentioned nimble, the ability to create a culture where failure is accepted. So to me, the role for HR is, number one, define what it means to be a digital leader, which in our world means you have to think, act, and react completely differently than you have before. HR then needs to take those characteristics and assess the current leaders against those characteristics to have an honest perspective on where the current leaders sit with regard to those attributes and whether they're going to be able to take the organization into the digital era. Again, digital being a mindset shift, not about technology. And I would include collaboration as one of the pieces of that mindset shift that has to occur. And then I think HR has to think about, one, resetting the succession process. I think we have found most company succession processes are too narrow. They are very much focused on a legacy way of, well, this person needs this much experience to be able to be considered a successor. Oftentimes they don't really reflect true inclusion in terms of the candidates that are in there. So resetting that process and then thinking about how to provide true leadership development opportunities, true coaching on an ongoing basis, recognizing that many existing leaders will not have those types of attributes. And that it has to be that tactical, I think, and that formulaic in order to really affect change and to bring forth that collaboration. Because collaboration, I was just speaking to the CIOs, the top CIOs at a consumer products company actually last week, and I was saying you can't just wave your wand and say, okay, we're going to be collaborative. That's a tough thing to do. You have to teach collaboration. You have to help people to understand and provide them with the tools to collaborate and the infrastructure to collaborate. And so HR needs to be thinking about the attributes, the leadership attributes, putting in place the leadership development programs. They also have to be thinking about and collaborating with IT to think about what collaboration tools can we put in place across the organization to promote the sharing of ideas. How do you rethink the workspace to promote collaboration? It has to be all in. But I think HR can absolutely be at the helm of driving that type of change because it truly is cultural change that we're talking about here.
Let's take a bit of a reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast. Today we're talking about human capital trends and executive collaboration with Erica Vellini. One of the things I just want to mention that I love that you haven't said is the M word, and by the M word I mean millennials. I am very tired of hearing, oh, millennials do this, oh, millennials do that. No, it's a digital mindset, and I think that that's critical. It doesn't matter how old or how young or what your experience is. We all need to be focused on the digital, collaborative future of work way.
Yeah, you read my mind, and there is a distinct reason I did not raise, and it's exactly what you talked about, which is I think we have, the millennials have kind of become this red herring. The millennials did this. No, the millennials just happened to come at a point where they also had a platform in the form of social media to express how they were feeling, so it became more visible. But I actually don't think, and many studies have proven this, that the millennials are any different than the baby boomers were. The environment is different, but everyone, it's not about this generation per se, it's about the time that we're living in, and it's about what's needed to promote innovation in a world that thrives on innovation. And I think it's really important that organizations start thinking that way because, listen, the millennials today, they're managers, right? They're team leaders. This isn't, it's really Generation Z that's the new generation that's coming in. So we have to shift that whole conversation and recognize this is about a dramatic shift in the environment in which we're working and, frankly, a dramatic shift in what's required for organizations to succeed. That's what digital is really about.
Let's talk about some of the other surprising trends that you uncovered in the Human Trends Report. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, so let me actually talk about social enterprise in general, because a lot of people hear social enterprise and they think, what is that? Does that mean corporate citizenship? And in our mind, it really doesn't. What it means is that we believe that organizations are going to start to become measured based on more than just their financial performance. Financial performance, of course, will continue to be critical, but a social enterprise is judged more than just how they perform financially. It's how they treat and respect all the stakeholders in their external environment, whether it's their customers, their shareholders, the communities in which they live. And it's a recognition that organizations are being asked to play a bigger role in society than they've ever been asked to play before. And what we found is there's three reasons for that. One is the power of the individual, that the individual has a stronger voice than they've ever had before, and they are calling for organizations to play a stronger role. And part of that is because we've seen a dramatic decline in the trust in government. And people are looking around, constituents are looking around saying, wait a second, if the government's not going to address this issue, then who is? And they're looking at corporations and organizations to be able to address it. And I think the third major factor that we saw is that while a lot of organizations believe that technology is going to be incredibly helpful and powerful and bring very positive change, that they're starting to see some of the adverse impacts that technology can bring if not managed appropriately. And they're calling on organizations to put guardrails in place around it. So really what we found is that these three factors are coming together to put organizations more in the spotlight than they ever have been before. And that context is actually why collaboration at the C-suite is so important, because you cannot become a social enterprise or operate as a social enterprise if the C-suite is operating in a siloed fashion. You need the perspective from your customers, from your employees, from your investors, all to come together to help you navigate what your role is in the context of society today. And so that was, I think for most of the people who have read the report this year, it was kind of brought to light an issue that I think a lot of organizations have been seeing, which is they're more in the spotlight than ever before. CEOs are out, they're more visible to the public. And I think there's a wake-up call there for organizations, and in particular for HR, to say, okay, culture isn't just something that we have to worry about internally, right? Our culture and our beliefs and our mission, they're on display for the external environment as well. And so we have to make sure that we're thinking about not just what's happening within our four walls, but how is it perceived outside? And to me, that really changes the lens of how you think about things like your employment brand, your employment experience, your values, and how you make sure that they're aligned to what broader society is thinking about and cares about. So that was, to me, I think that was really the thing that stuck out most to our readers, that really felt different and sort of felt like this is a major wake-up call and a real change in the role that organizations need to play.
One of the other areas that I was interested in your trends report is the aging workforce and how the older labor pool is now representing, finally, I shall say, as I enter that myself, a more experienced pool, but it represents a proven, committed, and more diverse set of workers, and a number of employers, an increasingly larger number of employers than ever before, believe that workers age 50 and more are now a valuable resource for training and mentoring. Can you talk a little bit about this shift and maybe also how it's not just U.S. focused, but it's a global shift that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, we found across 124 countries on this particular trend, we didn't find much nuance. This was a critical issue across the board. I think what companies are realizing, and I think this ties to the social enterprise as well, you have all of us are living longer, right? This new generation, the view is these people will live until they're 100, right? You live until 100, your work life is going to be 50, 60 years long. So you're living longer. You have to sustain, your lifestyle. Very few people count on Social Security, I would venture to say these days. And so the question becomes, how do you stay in the workforce longer? And I think companies are realizing is this is a resource that, one, could be very flexible in terms of what they do, right? They're willing to work along the lines of the gig economy. They have significant amount of experience. You mentioned mentoring that could be used to help mentor the next generation, which is incredibly valuable, especially as you're resetting leadership and you're looking for future successors and you're looking beyond the traditional successors that you might have had. And frankly, this generation of older workers, they're very willing to reskill and retool themselves and invest in that continuous learning. And I think sometimes people think that's a little bit of an oxymoron, but we're actually seeing that this generation is investing in themselves to learn all the new skills and capabilities that are out there. So for that reason, they're a very valuable resource that could be tapped into. And then if they're within your organization, they have institutional knowledge that they can bring forward. Not institutional knowledge meaning they know the way to do it and they're going to keep doing it, but they understand the way things work. They've seen it evolve, and they can help participate in the next evolution of the way that work needs to be done. In particular, because many of them might not have a stake in, what the job looks like moving forward. So they can also be an agent of change. And I think this is, to us, and that's why we wrote this chapter, this is a tremendous resource. And you saw most organizations do not have a strategy for dealing with this segment of the workforce. So while there's a high degree of recognition that the older workers are extremely valuable, there's also a recognition that most organizations aren't prepared for how to accommodate them, how to bring them into the organization, or how to create the right roles for them. So it represents a huge opportunity in the context of the future of work.
Erica, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you do at Deloitte?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Thank you for asking. You can go to Deloitte.com. You could type in human capital. That's the name of our practice at Deloitte. And you can find not only our human capital trends report, which we've talked about, a lot of our thought leadership that we produce on many of these topics, the services we offer. We have a Twitter page. We're on LinkedIn. So you could also find us on social media as well. And I hope folks will. And I hope today's conversation was valuable and thought-provoking.
It absolutely was. Thank you. I think we can all say that Erica is one of those professionals who is extremely passionate about human capital and the opportunity for us to set the table. It's right in front of us. Are we prepared to grab it and take the bull by the horns? Well, we talked a great deal about executive collaboration and modeling. I really want us to consider and think about some of the other trends in the report, particularly the upskilling for a more experienced workforce. In a culture where youth is celebrated, our workforce is older and more experienced and senior than ever before, and it's time we embrace that. We embrace the experienced and knowledgeable workforce. This means really considering ways to develop, train, and continue to leverage these workers. What are you doing to manage and drive this change? Thank you for joining the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes. Have a great day.
Production services for the Workology Podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.